If you were to look at a satellite map of the Indonesian island of Java, you would immediately notice two things. First, the sheer density of human settlement. Java is the world's most populous island, home to over 150 million people packed into an area roughly the size of New York State. Second, you would notice the topography. It is a jagged volcanic spine of impenetrable mountains and deep river valleys. For decades, these two geographical realities collided in the 140-kilometer stretch of land separating Indonesia's capital, Jakarta, from its fourth-largest city, Bandung. Economically, these two cities are deeply intertwined, functioning as the dual engines of Southeast Asia's largest economy. Logistically, however, they were separated by a grueling, unpredictable, and agonizingly slow 3-hour commute. Navigating the perpetually gridlocked toll roads or winding mountain passes was a logistical nightmare. Solving this bottleneck wasn't just a matter of convenience, it was a macroeconomic imperative. The solution presented to the Indonesian public was a gleaming, aerodynamic marvel of modern engineering that promised to collapse that 3-hour journey into just 40 minutes. Branded Whoosh, a remarkably catchy acronym for Waktu Hemat, Operasi Optimal, System Hebat, which roughly translates to time-saving, optimal operation, outstanding system. Southeast Asia's first high-speed rail network was designed from the ground up as a towering monument to national progress. But infrastructure is rarely just about moving people from point A to point B. By February 2026, Whoosh had morphed from a symbol of technological triumph into a fiscal and geopolitical paradox. To understand how a train that runs flawlessly on time became a financial catastrophe, you have to look past the aerodynamic nose cones and 350 km/h top speeds. You have to look at the ledgers. To truly comprehend the financial contagion currently engulfing the Indonesian state, the timeline must rewind to the years 2014 and 2015. At this point in time, Japan held a nearly unassailable position as the pioneer, though no longer the sole monopoly, of Asian high-speed rail. The Japanese Shinkansen network had been operating since 1964 with an absolutely immaculate safety record. To Tokyo, the Shinkansen was far more than a transit system. It was an emblem of technological supremacy and the absolute cornerstone of its official development assistance, or ODA, diplomacy. Japan wanted the Jakarta-Bandung route. Through the Japan International Cooperation Agency, or JICA, Tokyo spent a full decade and over $3 million studying the route's geological and economic feasibility. After this exhaustive research, Tokyo proposed a highly attractive $5 billion project. Japan offered to finance 75% of the total capital expenditure through a soft loan. The terms were nearly unbeatable, a 0.1% interest rate with a massive 40-year repayment term. But there was a catch. Tokyo required a sovereign guarantee. In the world of international development finance, a sovereign guarantee is essentially a binding legal commitment from the host nation's government. It dictates that if the project fails, or if the railway operator defaults on its loans, the state's national treasury is legally obligated to step in and cover the debt. It is the ultimate safety net for the lender. However, the administration of Indonesian President Joko Widodo was inherently skeptical. The government was eager to redirect its limited state funds toward basic, desperately needed infrastructure outside the wealthy island of Java, things like ports, toll roads, and power grids in Sumatra and Papua. Putting the national treasury on the line for a single luxury train route connecting two already wealthy cities was politically unpalatable. The Widodo administration firmly and unequivocally rejected Japan's demand for a sovereign guarantee. Sensing a rare strategic opening, Beijing orchestrated an aggressive, highly calculated counterbid. China proposed a financing structure that appeared, at least on paper, to solve Indonesia's dilemma entirely. Beijing offered to build the railway on a business-to-business, or B2B basis. This meant that the project would require absolutely no direct state funding and, crucially, no sovereign guarantee. To Jakarta, it sounded like an economic miracle. The mechanics of these competing bids laid the foundational groundwork for the disaster that was about to unfold. Japan's proposal estimated the initial cost at roughly $5.0 billion, requiring that strict sovereign guarantee. China's proposal estimated the cost slightly higher, at roughly $5.5 billion, but waived the guarantee. Both offered a 75% debt to 25% equity financing ratio over 40 years. However, China's loan carried a significantly higher interest rate, 2.0% for US dollars and 3.46% for renminbi, compared to Japan's nearly free 0.1%. The Chinese financial architecture was incredibly complex, centering on a special purpose vehicle, or SPV, named PT Kereta Cepat Indonesia China, or KCIC. The ownership of this new entity was meticulously divided. An Indonesian consortium of state-owned enterprises, known as PSBI, held a 60% controlling stake. Meanwhile, a Chinese state consortium, led by Beijing Yaoan HSR Company, held the remaining 40%. The China Development Bank agreed to extend a massive $3.96 billion loan directly to this newly formed company. The only collateral backing this astronomical sum was the railway's projected future ticket revenues, which were to be deposited into an ICBC-managed debt service reserve account. In September 2015, Indonesia officially awarded the contract to Beijing. The decision triggered immediate and severe diplomatic fallout. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe publicly communicated his deep, profound disappointment to President Widodo, framing the sudden pivot not just as a lost contract, but as a betrayal of long-standing bilateral trust. The loss sent shockwaves through the Japanese political and corporate establishment. It laid bare the reality that China's Belt and Road Initiative was successfully utilizing rapid execution, aggressive risk assumption, and flexible financing models to capture infrastructure dominance across the global south. But while this defeat accelerated their strategy, Tokyo's pivot was already in motion. Anticipating these shifts, the Abe administration had previously launched the Partnership for Quality Infrastructure in May 2015. The defining ideology of this Japanese initiative was a direct critique of the Chinese development model. Where China sold immediate cost savings and rapid construction timelines, Japan marketed the concept of life cycle cost. Japanese diplomats argued that while Shinkansen technology inherently required a higher initial capital outlay, it yielded vastly superior economic efficiency over a 50-year operational lifespan. This was due to significantly lower maintenance requirements, incredibly high energy efficiency, and unparalleled earthquake resilience. Furthermore, Japanese strategists explicitly highlighted the systemic, hidden risks embedded in China's business-to-business models. Their core thesis posited a simple but undeniable truth. Debt assumed by major state-owned enterprises in developing nations is, functionally and practically, sovereign debt. A national government simply cannot allow its primary, foundational infrastructure operators to collapse under the weight of foreign loans without triggering a catastrophic domestic economic crisis. It was a dire warning that, just a few years later, would prove devastatingly accurate. From an engineering standpoint, Whoosh is an undeniable triumph. The rolling stock utilized for the route, known as the KCIC 400AF, is a highly advanced export variant of China's domestic CR 400AF Fuxing units. These trains operate at commercial speeds of 350 km per hour. The engineering of the CR 400AF reflects cutting-edge advancements in aerodynamic efficiency. The Fuxing boasts a 12% lower air resistance than older Chinese iterations. This profile results in a highly efficient energy consumption rate of just 3.8 kilowatt-hours per 100 passenger kilometers. The 142.3-kilometer track itself is equally impressive. To navigate the treacherous mountainous topography of West Java, engineers had to blast 13 massive tunnels through solid rock and construct miles of towering elevated viaducts. But there is a fundamental rule in urban transit planning. Operational success is entirely dependent on spatial integration into the existing urban environment. A train is only useful if it takes people where they actually want to go. And it was here, in the spatial geography of the Jakarta-Bandung project, that severe, fatal vulnerabilities were engineered directly into the system. To minimize exorbitant land acquisition costs and desperately expedite the construction timeline, planners made the fateful decision to locate the terminal stations on the extreme, far-flung peripheries of both cities. In Jakarta, the terminus was built at Halim, a location that entirely bypasses central integrated transit hubs like Manggarai Station. Reaching the Halim terminus from the commercial center of Jakarta requires navigating the city's infamous, soul-crushing traffic for upwards of 45 minutes, or utilizing a newly built light rail transit connection that adds significant transfer time. But the spatial disconnect is even more severe at the Bandung terminus of Tegaluar. The high-speed rail line physically bypasses the historical city center of Bandung entirely. Passengers heading to the downtown core are forced to disembark a stop early at the Padalarang station located in the distant western suburbs. From there, they must transfer to a brand new Inca-manufactured diesel-electric feeder train for an additional 20-minute slow-speed journey into central Bandung. When you factor in the 45-minute transit to Halim, the waiting times, the 30-minute high-speed ride, the transfer at Padalarang, and the feeder train journey, the true door-to-door travel time frequently stretches to anywhere between 50 and 90 minutes. This fragmented, disjointed journey severely diminishes the core value proposition for price-sensitive consumers. Whoosh's primary competitor is the legacy Argo Parahyangan conventional train. Yes, it takes 3 hours, but it travels directly from the heart of central Jakarta to the absolute center of Bandung, requiring exactly 0 transfers. Furthermore, the legacy train costs between 80,000 and 150,000 rupiah, compared to Whoosh's dynamic pricing model, which ranges from 150,000 to 250,000 rupiah. With private cars or buses costing even less on the newly expanded toll roads, Whoosh rapidly found itself trapped in a lethal economic dead zone. It was simply too expensive for budget-conscious leisure travelers and far too geographically inconvenient for time-sensitive business travelers. The initial promise that Whoosh would be fully operational by 2019 rapidly disintegrated as it collided with reality. The project was immediately paralyzed by severe land acquisition bottlenecks. Securing contiguous, linear parcels of land through thousands of privately owned plots in a decentralized, litigious democracy is notoriously protracted. It is a wildly different environment from the state-mandated rapid clearances that Chinese engineers were accustomed to domestically. Furthermore, the push for rapid construction caused significant environmental and infrastructural friction. Civil society groups documented flooded local roads, devastating landslides, and severe disruptions to vital water catchment areas. And then, the COVID-19 pandemic arrived. Global supply chains paralyzed, Chinese engineering personnel were locked down, and the project's fragile financial models completely imploded. The original highly optimistic cost estimate of $6.07 billion swelled by a massive $1.20 billion, pushing the final capitalized cost of the railway to a staggering $7.27 billion. This billion-dollar cost overrun shattered the foundational premise of the 2015 agreement. The joint venture, KCIC, possessed neither the liquid capital nor the independent corporate creditworthiness to absorb a sudden billion-dollar liability. The project was teetering on the brink of total collapse. It desperately required supplementary financing. At this critical juncture, the China Development Bank agreed to finance 75% of the cost overrun, but they drastically, fundamentally altered the terms of the deal. Stripping away the lenient, business-to-business facade that had won them the contract in the first place, the CDB demanded that the supplementary loans be explicitly backed by the Indonesian government. This was the exact sovereign guarantee that Jakarta had so adamantly refused to give Japan years earlier. Recognizing the severely elevated risk profile of the delayed project, the CDB also imposed a significantly higher interest rate, jumping from the original 2% up to 3.4%. Cornered by billions of dollars in sunk costs and a half-finished railway, President Widodo capitulated. In October 2021, a presidential decree officially reversed the legal prohibition on using state funds for the project. Later, in October 2023, PT Kereta Api Indonesia, or KAI, the state railway operator and majority stakeholder, signed a $448 million facility agreement with the CDB to cover the debt shortfall, explicitly backed by the state. The core mechanism Indonesia had structured the entire deal to avoid had ultimately been enforced by Beijing. When Whoosh finally launched in October 2023, it was framed by intense, highly choreographed national pride. By late 2025, the railway had accumulated over 12 million passengers, boasting incredibly impressive operational reliability. But beneath this polished, aerodynamic exterior, a silent financial catastrophe was actively dismantling the balance sheets of Indonesia's most critical state-owned enterprises. The financial hemorrhaging escalated to truly unprecedented levels throughout 2024 and 2025. During the full year of 2024, PSBI recorded a net loss of 4.19 trillion rupiah, equivalent to roughly $260 million. In just the first half of 2025, it lost another 1.62 trillion rupiah. PT Kereta Api Indonesia, or KAI, holding a controlling 58.53% stake in the consortium, absorbed the absolute brunt of the damage. The staggering high-speed rail losses began completely wiping out the hard-earned profits from KAI's highly successful legacy conventional rail networks across the country. During a tense parliamentary hearing in August 2025, KAI's president-director characterized the Whoosh debt as a literal time bomb, noting that an otherwise healthy, profitable national railway had been dragged into a severe structural deficit. By the time President Prabowo Subianto assumed office, the financial architecture of the high-speed rail was in terminal, irreversible collapse. The new administration confronted an immovable, brutal reality. Allowing the nation's premier state-owned enterprises to default on billions of dollars of Chinese debt was economically and geopolitically impossible. Nor was ceasing rail operations an option, given the massive blow to national prestige that would entail. In late 2024 and throughout 2025, the government executed a massive, highly complex restructuring of state assets. This culminated in the establishment of the Daya Anegata Nusantara Investment Management Agency, or Danantara. Positioned as a super-sovereign wealth fund explicitly modelled on Singapore's highly successful Temasek, Danantara was mandated to consolidate state-owned assets, with a lofty goal of eventually managing $900 billion. Naturally, the existential immediate crisis of the $7.27 billion Whoosh debt fell squarely onto the desk of Danantara's leadership. Throughout late 2025 and early 2026, incredibly intense, high-stakes negotiations took place behind closed doors between Danantara, the Indonesian Ministry of Finance, and Chinese banking regulators. The primary objective was to hammer out a comprehensive debt restructuring plan to prevent a cascading sovereign default. The parties eventually secured a painful agreement to extend the tenor of the massive China Development Bank loan from 40 years to 60 years. While this move reduced the immediate crushing burden of annual amortization, it formally, permanently acknowledged the railway as a multi-generational sunk cost, rather than the commercially viable enterprise it was sold as. The inevitable breaking point arrived in a stunning, historic reversal of national policy. On February 10, 2026, the State Secretary Minister delivered a definitive, somber announcement to the press. Yes, the payment of Whoosh debt will be using the state budget. This single declaration represented the absolute, complete inversion of the 2015 bidding war narrative. The singular, driving justification utilized a decade prior to award the contract to China and reject Japan's highly concessional 0.1% loan, the absolute, unconditional protection of the state budget, had entirely evaporated. After a full decade of complex, opaque corporate structuring, the $7.27 billion liability, now carrying a punishing 3.4% interest rate, was ultimately placed squarely on the shoulders of the Indonesian taxpayer. Japan observed the unfolding Indonesian disaster from the sidelines with acute strategic interest. Tokyo's diplomats, alongside JICA, rapidly integrated the Jakarta-Bandung delays, cost overruns, and resulting debt crises directly into their standard diplomatic pitch. Whoosh was swiftly transformed into the ultimate cautionary tale, a real-time demonstration of the risks associated with prioritizing rapid execution and opaque financing over meticulous planning and life-cycle cost analysis. The Jakarta-Bandung high-speed railway stands today as a towering, highly complex monument to the shifting realities of modern geoeconomics. As an isolated physical engineering asset, it is an absolute triumph, a powerful, roaring testament to the rapid maturation of Chinese high-speed rail technology and the undeniable capacity of Chinese state enterprises to export highly advanced, complex systems across unforgiving geographies. The aerodynamic CR400AF genuinely physically altered the spatial relationship between Indonesia's two most vital economic hubs. However, as a mechanism of international development finance and urban transit planning, the Whoosh project represents a catastrophic, multi-generational systemic failure. The foundational, alluring premise of the 2015 bid, that a massive $5.5 billion infrastructure asset could be magically materialized entirely off the sovereign balance sheet, was a dangerous, highly intoxicating economic fiction. The project unequivocally, painfully demonstrates that in emerging markets, the debt of major state-owned enterprises is inextricably, permanently linked to the sovereign's broader fiscal health.